So the last context we want to look at briefly is the redemptive context. This is often an overlooked context when we think of the different contexts that we want to consider when we come to a passage. But the thing that we want to keep in mind is that there is a story going on in all of the scriptures. This is essentially an adaptation from Vaughan Roberts' book, God's Big Picture. And he talks about eight different chapters of God's story that are all kind of listed there with P's: the pattern of the kingdom, the perished kingdom, the promised kingdom, so on and so forth. And one of the things that we want to keep in mind is that each of these chapters is, to a degree, unique as it relates to who are God's people, where is God's place, or where is he dwelling in particular in relation to his people, and how is God ruling and blessing. And so we want to keep this in mind, and I want to explain maybe why the redemptive storyline is so important. So imagine reading in Psalm 51:11. Again, this is a kind of a different chapter of God's story. It's in the Old Testament, and it says, "Cast me not away from your presence, and take not your Holy Spirit from me." And so as we think about this passage, as believers today, should we could be concerned that God, maybe because of our sin, would take his Holy Spirit from us? And so we want to keep that in mind, in that this was written at a different redemptive chapter, in a different redemptive chapter of God's story than where we are living today, where God's presence is actually residing in the believer through the Holy Spirit, and we're sealed in him. Imagine reading Leviticus 24:19 through 20. "If anyone injures his neighbor as he has done, it shall be done to him, fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Whatever injury he has given a person shall be given to him." So as we read that, do we think, should we do that to people as they maybe cause us injury? Should we retaliate in that way? But then in the back of your mind, you think, wait a minute, Jesus didn't say an eye for an eye anymore, but he actually said to love our enemy. And so we want to keep in mind that, again, this was written in a different part of the redemptive storyline to a particular people who are a geopolitical entity, the Israelites, and we're not them, and that's not us. So we want to keep that in mind. Or we come to Jeremiah 29:11. This is another often overused and maybe misapplied verse where it says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." Well, this is important for us to consider in the context, because the broader context is that the people, the Israelites, were in captivity in Babylon, and Jeremiah, though he had been warning of this captivity to come, now that they're in captivity, he's saying, you've got 70 years, but at the end of the 70 years, God is saying he has plans for you, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. Now, I think there's some things that we can draw from that in our chapter of God's story to apply to our lives, but we can't necessarily apply this in a one-for-one kind of way, because this was written in a different chapter of God's story to a different people in a different context in which we live. And so that's why thinking through the redemptive context is important, so that we don't rip things out of context that were meant maybe for somebody else and seek to try to apply them for us today. And so we want to keep in mind, who was this written to, and what chapter was this written to, and what was God doing in the unfolding story of redemption.